Hello, everyone. My name is Kareem with the Essential Libertarians, giving you the tools for self-governance. Today, we have an awesome guest. We have none other than the Christian anarchist. We're going to get into his belief system, all the other stuff that he does, some of his book, and maybe some interesting stuff. What is up, Jack Casey?
Hi, how's it going? Yeah, I'm careful to even label myself because I have so many mixed spiritual beliefs that it's probably heresy to someone somewhere, no matter what. So I'm even hesitate to use that label. But certainly a spiritual anarchist in the sense that yes, I believe that part of our holy mission in this realm is to resist the worldly systems and powers that be, the kingdom of Satan, if you will. And I think
and I always find it ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm sure this will be in 2024 as in 2020. There are people who literally sit around and they're like, bro, don't you know George Bush is pro-life or Donald Trump's pro-life? I'm like, well, I'm not like a geopolitical analyst on this show, but if you Google Iraq and Yemen, you might have a different opinion. And furthermore, even if you could argue, fine, that a president didn't get involved in any wars or do anything and was pro-life and all that good stuff, I would find it very hard to see Jesus endorsing someone for the state when he was either, depending on people's beliefs, killed by the state or attempted murder. I can't see him like, well, you know, that Caesar might be okay. I don't think he'll kill me, but I'm not sure which Caesar. I'm going to probably get persecuted anyway. Wouldn't it be nice if the blue Caesar did it? And that's the ridiculous thing to me.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great, yeah, exactly. It's funny how even in the Bible, and again, it's like, I don't want to speak for more traditional, church-going Christians because I'm sort of my own thing, but I'm closely tied to that sphere. And I feel like, yeah, in a lot of scriptural lessons and stories, there is this resistance to Pharaoh, to the state, to Rome, to all these worldly kingdoms that are often the one putting the boot on the true believers, right? And throughout these stories. So it's ironic that there are a lot of people who say they believe in God and a higher power, but they connect that to obedience to the state and these sort of, human idols or man-made kings. And so I love the idea that that the creator who made us, we can argue all day about who that creator is and what they actually look like and all that stuff, but at its fundamental premise that whoever made us wants this against the human beings and the systems that are kind of in existence in defiance of that creator, right? Like a sort of man-made God. And I think, yeah, and I think people's desire to obey a just authority, right, does come from a good place. People who want to obey higher concepts like truth and justice and and all these things that could be personified through a creator and a sort of source of all wisdom or intelligence or integrity and justice, all these higher ideals. And so it's sad that people have a desire to submit or surrender to a just authority, but rather than surrendering to a just authority that's kind of higher minded or more abstract or from a sort of otherworldly realm, they obey these sort of human worldly images of what the government presents itself as, which is, oh, I'm going to be your just savior, your protector, you're all this. And rather than finding in themselves, they're an image of that creator, and that you can find that sovereignty in yourself, but then also that if you're going to obey an authority of any kind, you'd want to obey higher things like the truth and liberty and all these higher concepts that you could call God.
A lot about that.
Can you guys hear me all right?
Yes,
Okay,
I can.
just making sure.
I want to introduce my awesome co-host, Daniel Vitro.
How's it going, Jack?
Check him out on Conquering the Divide and his story, The Quantum Effect. So I guess my question couple questions to throw at you from a spiritual anarchist perspective is this. Not that I'm routinely going after the 10 Commandments, but it does make sense. If you believe in a monotheistic God, don't have other gods before you. Or even if you have a polytheistic religion, don't have anything before them. Like, don't put something else, because God's supposed to be the highest value. And if you've watched Larkin Rose, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Larkin Rose. He is an agorist, but he made a very good point. He said that oftentimes people associate government with a religion. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of religious. And I'm like, you know what? It is a religion. There's the whole, hang on the Constitution. Will you uphold the Constitution? Even though they won't. Even though they haven't read it. Yeah, we'll uphold the Constitution. There's all these ceremonies and rituals and the inaugural thing. So to me, it is. And people refer to government officials as authorities like saints and things like, oh, well, Dr. So said, Paul Krugman said this, and this authority figure said this.
Well, yeah, I think, Kareem, what you're getting to is, like, many people in political politics, in American politics, are worshipped, mainly by the left, but also by the right. And it's not every single politician. Like, you can look at a politician like your basic senator in Kansas and be like, that guy's not worshipped. That's just a senator. People like him. People voted for him. Maybe his constituents agree with his policies. But then you look at these more sort of polarizing, like, candidates and political figures, say Trump, say Biden, say Pelosi, these figures on the left and on the right who are extremely polarizing and are vehemently worshipped, even worshipped when they've done things. And they've done things that are not only immoral, not only unethical, but they've done multiple things that are moral and unethical. And it's became clear. It's not something that's a conspiracy or that there's lack of evidence to make the assumption. It's clear as day what they're doing. Yet people who are their believers refuse to even acknowledge that the sins that their politicians are doing, refuse to acknowledge it, and refuse to accept the idea that their politicians may be anything less than, let's say, sacred or a saint, which is crazy because you can see the difference, right, on both the left and the right, like what the right worships versus what the left worships. And some people try and make the argument that the left worships more than the right, or at the very least that their figures on their side are a lot more, let's say, parasitic, toxic, and malevolent, right? That's what I hear a lot of people, conservatives, saying, at least. And maybe that's true, but the point is, Donald Trump as a figure on the right, I've never seen anyone worship quite like he has. Like, now there's a lot of people who hate him. I'm aware of that, but the people who do like Trump, who are Trump fans, I mean, they're on a completely different level of worshiping that I've not seen. Like, it's insane. Like, most liberals and leftists you talk to, like, every day in the grocery stores, they're like, yeah, like Hillary Clinton. But they couldn't even name you 4 of the bills they passed. They couldn't even name you 3 pieces of legislation that were passed. These people are like highly obsessed of Trump. They know every detail about his life. It's a completely different animal. And what they also refuse to do, and I haven't done a show in a while, but I met this guy in the gym the other day, right, in the sauna. And essentially, I kept bringing up critiques of Trump. I'll just give some examples. Drone strikes, the fact that he openly supported quantitative easing. He openly supported printing trillions of dollars. He openly supported not only not abolishing the Federal Reserve, but he didn't support an audit of the Federal Reserve as well. He drone strike Syria. I mean, I can go on down the list of all the things that Donald Trump did that was horrific. And every time his answer to that was, oh, he's not, of course he's not perfect, but look at the Democrats. Look at the Democrats. It's like he's so like unwilling to even concede that Trump could possibly be equally as bad as the Democrats because of how much the Democrats have attacked him. And that's how he was. He was like, look at what they did to Trump. They came after him, the January 6th. So this guy was on the defense. And I can see that a lot in conservatives these days, how much on the defense they are and how pushed against the corner they are, pushed into a very, very tight bubble. And I think that's what becomes dangerous, when people start to get pushed in these dark corners of the internet,
Yeah, I was watching MSNBC, and then one lady was referring to Nancy Pelosi like a god. So yes, the left to me seems to do it to institutional figures like, oh, Paul Krugman said this, Fauci said this.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg was also a good example.
Ginsburg, or people who have high degrees. If you get an Ivy League degree, you could probably say that, up is down and down is up and the sky is green. And they're like, well, Newsweek or AP or whoever, or I can't remember, Reuters or NPR says this. So That's it. You know, an official authority said it, the New England Medical Journal, whatever. It seems to me on the right, there's certain figures. They're like Abraham Lincoln, or if you want, Donald Trump. Oh man, Trump, did this, and that. I'm like, how about he's not the worst thing ever? He's not the greatest. He's just your average, to me, somewhat populist neocon thing out there, and he's kind of a bumbling, fool. But I guess my question for you, Jack, is not to bring exactly the 10 Commandments, but do you think it's impossible to worship the state, or to be advocate for the legitimacy of the state, and also say that you serve a higher power? I don't care if that's Allah, Krishna, Jesus, or something else.
Yeah, I think the interpretation of spiritual truth that makes the most sense to me, both in and outside the Bible, always seems to reinforce this idea of not serving false gods and not blindly obeying priests or authorities who act as intermediaries between you and the divine. And there can be some sort of contradiction in some of these stories and their themes, but I think overarching and reduced to their fundamental concept, it always seems to come back to this idea of an empowerment of your individual personhood, and that you're an image of God, and there's a sacredness in you that must be protected and free, and yet coupled with that an obedience to the true high authority. It's as though everyone is craving some sort of master or wisdom, or some sort of being a representation of something that could deserve to be voluntarily followed and served, right? Like a righteous, king or queen or something, right? And the one that you would choose to lay your sword at their feet, kind of thing, versus governments, which are the false gods, and the ones who, rather than earn your support, they take from you, they force you, they command you in this way. So I kind of like this this idea that the divine is the holy and righteous version of what man-made governments are trying to imitate or be, but can never be, and can never deserve that kind of loyalty and stuff. Whereas, of course, anarchists who are atheists, they're basically just saying, no gods, no masters, no kings. They apply that even to things outside this realm. And I suppose for anyone who believes in a higher power, they believe the same way about all worldly governments and things, but they just say, well, there is an authority that we should obey, and it's the only one who could deserve our trust and obedience, which is the one who, created all this, right? And if you go to private property rights and extend that concept spiritually, it's like, if existence is the true God's private property, and they built all this and own all this, then we are rightfully in debt to the true owner and inventor of all creation, right? And so it's interesting how for the spiritual anarchists that those two concepts can overlap at the same time, that you rebel against worldly authority, you obey spiritual higher authority. But yeah, certainly not as a fan of organized religions or governments that try to enslave people literally or with their mind.
Yeah, I know one of the organizers here in PA, Jacob Winograd, and I'm pretty sure him, would say like, "No king but Christ," with an anarchist symbol. And I was like, okay, that can make sense.
Yeah.
In the sense that if you're looking for, I don't think it's contradictory, because if you are looking for or seeking or being part with or one with a higher power, then that higher power is going to spiritually enlighten you, or give you eternal life, or show you another path to existence. That is actually an authority you can follow, as opposed to someone in the government who just makes up legislation, and then that legislation has no bearing on actual natural law or morality. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Mark Passio from What on Earth is Happening at all, but essentially he's a, I guess, natural law anarchist who basically says that there's inherent laws in nature that have cause and effect, just like gravity. If I drop my phone now, it's going to fall. If I do something immoral to somebody, it's going to come back in some way. It's not an immediate effect like gravity, though. That's the catch. someone can say, hey, I did something immoral, nothing happened yet, but then it happens over time. And that can be, you know, they get a disease for this or PTSD, or, you know, they have some kind of illness, maybe even, or something happens. So when it comes to spiritual anarchy, does it follow a path of natural law or consequentialism, like St. Thomas Aquinas pointed out, that if you do some irreprehensible behavior that's immoral and you harm sentient beings, it will come back?
Right. And whether it's almost as though for people who don't necessarily subscribe to certain spiritual beliefs, it's like it is the equivalent of like nature. It's like there's an unmovable reality. There's a laws of physics. There are just true things about nature that are so ironclad that even though we believe in political freedom and free will and individuality, all these things, there is an obedience to that authority, to just reality. Existence has truths to it that just cannot be defied just because they're true. They're just by the nature of truth. And so spiritually, you know, you would just personify that as, well, those things have an intelligence or a consciousness. That thing is a being or a person. So to understand the idea of God that way, it's like, okay, there's an unyielding truth or force of nature that is God, that is just reality, and that the only thing you know, and it's almost like saying our enslavement to governments is in defiance of nature. It's in defiance of our natural, like, you know, it's trying to clash with reality when we try to force people to live a certain way or obey certain things, or, you know, and speaking of higher powers and authorities, I do hear a higher pitched chirp that keeps coming in that seems like it's a divine intervention. Do we know what that chirp is in the background or where it's coming from?
I was hearing something.
Yeah. I didn't know if that was coming from one of y'all's or what. I don't think it's coming from back here. Just in case it was something we knew of that could be turned off. I wanted to point out in case you guys had heard it too.
I don't know. I heard it. I don't know if it was me.
There it goes. There it goes again. Huh. I don't think it's on my side. Okay. Well, in any case, yeah. So it's interesting that you know, spiritual or atheist libertarians can agree on defying worldly powers and observing reality and nature and those sort of unyielding truths. And it's just whether or not you personify that as a living being or not, you know, and that's a whole different conversation and argument.
Yeah. And that's kind of why I was interested, because I looked at your book, but I haven't like gone through it in detail. But like fundamentally, if you were to deconstruct it into like a few ideas or the main ideas, what would those be? Also, I think Daniel had a question, correct?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, well, I had something to sort of touch on there. That I think, Jack, you made a good point, but there's this thing sort of like underneath a lot of anarchists that I see, not all, but there's this sort of this nature about a lot of people who are anarchists to sort of intuitively disobey authority and dislike authority in general, and dislike any sort of you know, centralized control mechanism which can sort of exert its force slash coercion over, you know, them slash their family or the populace. And sometimes I see this in a lot of anarchists, some with great ideas, but it's like, are you thinking this way? Are you thinking, you know, let me build a society based off this because I'm against authority, and I'm also thinking about the manner in which I'm going to construct its sort of foundations? Or are you just rebelling against authority without actually looking into how the system you're going to set up, you know, after that authority or post authority, right? In the sort of anarcho-capitalist system, I see a lot of people just saying, you know, I don't want any leaders. I don't want any people telling me what to do. I don't want people with power or anything like that. But that's that, like you said, as it's a fundamental reality when you have a society of people, especially, you know, over 100, 200, 300 people, Dunbar's number, you have people who are leaders and you have hierarchies that form. And what I see from a lot of anarchists, especially the more younger ones, is that they have this instinctual nature to rebel authority, but they're not thinking too deeply into exactly what that means and whether that's actually sort of poisoning and biasing the way that they're looking at their sort of socioeconomic theory.
Yes, thank you. No, I think you're right. there are anarchists who forget that in their rebellion against unjust and forced coercion-based hierarchies, they sometimes take that to mean all hierarchies of all kinds should always be destroyed. And I think that's a sort of
Yes.
deconstructive left angle where they are rebelling against any hierarchy they see, even hierarchies that form naturally and are chosen in voluntary systems. So, when you go to work at your job, you are choosing to participate in a hierarchy in which there is a reward for where you are in that hierarchy and how it operates. And so it's true. I think it's important that those of us who are either ANCAPs or in those types of thinking remember that, right, it's not that all hierarchies are bad, it's that forced coercive hierarchies are bad because they go against human nature. They go against what creates efficient and useful hierarchies that you can opt in and out of anytime you want, because if you don't like that hierarchy you're in, you can go find another. And because everyone in some sense is at different levels of different hierarchies in different spheres of their life. It could be at home, you're the boss at home, and so you're the king of that realm, right? But then when you go to your job, you're lower on the hierarchy because your boss is the king of that little kingdom. Or mother with her kids versus or if you're an expert in some specific field, you're higher up on that hierarchy, and it's good it's good that you are treated as someone who knows things if you do and you're good at them. There's like a competency skill-based hierarchy that is just natural. It's a part of life. And so it's okay that there are these natural hierarchies. We all develop things we're better or worse at. And it's great because then you find the places where you are, you climb those hierarchies and do well, and then you go participate in other people's hierarchies where there are others better than you who can do the things you can't, the things you don't have time to learn, right? It's just like the free market concept. It's like, I don't have time to learn how to build a house, but I know there's a guy who does know how to build it, and I'm gonna trade with him. Yeah.
And because of my success in a particular hierarchy, I now have profit that I can deliver to another man for his services because I'm not at the top of the hierarchy. So that's really how the free market works. In general. And like you said, that's a good way of explaining it. There's a near infinite, if not infinite, hierarchies at any given time. But the thing that you sort of touched on there that goes back with what I said is that you guys were saying earlier about a sort of fundamental reality that exists, that's a priori, that's empirically true, regardless of whether you say it's true or it's not true. It's there, right? Undeniable truth that guides the universe, right? You can say sort of universal laws that allow human beings to even exist in the first place, right? Matter, atoms, chemical reactions, all this stuff. And it seems to me that recently, and you were talking about how you can't deny that, right? You can't, you can try and deny gravity, but if you jump off a bridge, you're going to die. You're going to feel the effects of gravity.
Right.
But it seems to be that there's such, and I think this is linked to the sort of decaying of Christianity and spiritualism in general. There seems to be on the left a very deep spiritual hole where a lot of people have not only just lost all touch with Christianity or any of the major religions, but any spirituality in general. It seems that there's this decay on the left that is leading people on the modern left and who are ideologically sort of in that sort of domain to almost vehemently oppose and deny that fundamental reality. Because if you're not spiritually in tune, if you don't understand the nature of things, right? Let's say, just go back to Genesis, whatever book you want to look at, right? The good thing about those doctrines, those religious texts, is that they explain things to you in a manner which you can comprehend, and you don't need to do the scientific work to actually investigate, hey, how is this? It explains it to you in a fairly simplified manner, right? God created the heavens, and you can sort of comprehend it. But the modern left, because they pretty much denied not just religion, but spirituality in general, there's nothing there. And when there's nothing there and all you have to do is fight with reality itself, right? The bareness of reality, you start to run in these concepts which they pose some resistance against your ideological theories, which try and skirt the bounds of conceptual reality. And when you start to get into the domain of everything is socially constructed, let's just say you have that foundation, that's a philosophy of yours. Well, then if you look at the world as if everything's socially constructed, well, then what is sex, right? What is gender? What are all these things, if not just socially constructed? And if there is no God, if there is no, let's say, underlying fundamental architectural design, whether it's by, Allah, Jesus, whoever the God or, the Messiah might be, well, then it's hard to navigate in the world. And you keep running into these obstacles that sort of get in the way of your philosophical, call it postmodern, social constructivist ideas that say, well, there's not really a fundamental reality. Everything is sort of interwoven in a way where, if with the right interpretation, you can skirt the bounds of reality. And this is why you see people here. A perfect example. There was a poll that was done recently, a couple of weeks ago, among American teenagers. So from ages like 17 to 19, and over 20% of them said men could get pregnant. Now that's a new thing for those of you who don't know. That number in general might not sound like a lot, but when you really look at the numbers in a lot of, especially major cities, you're looking at 20-30% of the population who think that men can get pregnant. Now the question is, do they actually think that? That's the question. Do they think that, or do they think that saying that will virtue signal to those who they want to describe them as positive, as morally virtuous? Are they just saying that to be part of the club without having to face any sort of backlash, or what's driving them to say that? And I guess I'd ask you that, Jack. What is driving people to just? It's not just they're denying reality; it's that they're fighting with reality and they don't want to accept reality. It's as though there's this spiritual sort of decay in I'd say the West in general right now. And it's like you have a portion of the population who is at war with all the fundamental basic biological realities that no one's ever had problems with for a while. I'd say a good deal of time.
Yeah. I think you nailed it. It's when you're completely unmoored from anything to do with reality, when you don't believe that even reality can be an authority in your life, it can backfire. And because, at some point, then it's a serpent eating its own tail. It's like your own ideas then become, they come under the sword of your non-commitment to any objective truth. If you don't believe in any objective truth or reality, then even your statements about reality can be self-defeating. Eventually it's a self-defeating mentality.
It's parasitic.
And usually
very parasitic.
And sorry, I still keep hearing that chirping coming in. I don't know what it is. It almost sounds like when a smoke alarm battery is going off.
Oh, that might be
I don't know if you get
my fire alarm. That might be my.
Do you guys hear that too?
1 second.
Well, my only thought is if it's not too loud for you guys, I'm only worried it's coming through sharper for any listeners when we play this back. It might be picking up on the audio louder than
I'll just
normal.
I finished.
I was gonna say,
I understand what you're saying, that like people are wrestling.
We can still proceed anyway,
but anyway, I was actually going to ask you from a spiritual anarchist perspective, because maybe there's a fundamental difference between some Christian anarchists and spiritual and stuff like that. How does that relate to, okay, let's forget the state. Say the state's gone, Schwabi and Sleepy Joe and Deep State gone, or, are gone and there's no there's still communities like the Amish that utilize the church and church, maybe a pastor or reverend as a authority figure. And I'll say one interesting thing. There's a doc now, and I was trying to find out who came up with the theory behind what people are doing. It's a reverend named Thomas Malthus, if that gives that away. So how do spiritual anarchists, maybe even conversely Christian anarchists, deal with authority that says whether it's good, malevolent or good, maybe in a church or a mosque setting or a synagogue or a temple, that says I'm going to be an authority or an intermediary to you in whatever you consider to be ultimate truth. Do they reject that? Do they accept it? Do you accept it under certain conditions? How might that work, if it does work? Does that make sense?
Are you? And I'm sorry, some of it cut out a little bit, but were you asking, like, if we did get rid of the governments, how would the competing and conflicting religious groups and churches function? Is that what you were asking? Like, how would they operate together?
I was asking if someone's like a spiritual anarchist like yourself, because I did study Somalia probably too much, and I was trying to figure out, okay, there's no government there, or presumably you could argue that there were microstates there. How did they get along? And one way is they used a little bit of Sharia law, Islamic courts, to try and facilitate social order. And they also use customary law. Now, customary law doesn't have to necessarily be religious, but it can be something like zir or common law or that. So if you're a spiritual anarchist and there's no state, do you still defer to a church or a synagogue or a mosque as an authority? Or do you just go by, hey, me and my neighbors want to be governed by this certain group of
Right.
principles.
I think it's going to be voluntary based. Yeah. So it's going to be, you're going to see that. So what people forget, it's not that there wouldn't be governance. It's that it'd be governance that you opt in or out of, and not necessarily locked by geography. I mean, maybe some would function that way, like little mini governments, but I think it'd be more like, exactly. Because you imagine right now, you could have a neighborhood and you could have 50 people in the neighborhood, and yet all of them might go to completely different churches, have completely different belief systems. And so rather than being geographically under a jurisdiction where they have to all agree on everything, they each go to the church groups or community groups that they believe in. They pay their own tithe or donations to the groups they support. They have their own welfare systems, their own, networks of support. Maybe the local neighbors do have something together they band with, and help each other. So you could see almost like these overlapping kingdoms or overlapping governments that are purely voluntary and coexisting in the same geographic spaces, because they're just, do you want to subscribe to our service or not? Essentially, do you want to subscribe to this church or not? Do you want to subscribe to our help? Well, here are our rules. Here are our ethics and codes you have to live by to still be part of this church. And yeah, so you'd have all these basically voluntary societies living amongst each other.
Yeah, that's kind of what I pictured, like something like the Amish or the Mennonites. Obviously, with the technology you want to use, hopefully. I don't think we want to go completely, because if we go completely non-technical, then we don't have the ability to have this conversation. But still, that's kind of what I was picturing with all that stuff. Just out of curiosity, before I go on to more stuff, looking from the spiritual side, have you ever looked into a guy named Manly P. Hall or Neville Goddard or David R. Hawkins or any of those thinkers who are purely spiritual? They're not political at all, really. Maybe Manly P. Hall is a little bit.
You know what? I'm sorry, some of that cut out a little bit, so I missed some of the names you're mentioning. What was it you're asking of those names?
I asked if you've ever heard. He was a high-ranking Mason called Manly P. Hall, Manly Palmer Hall, or people like Neville Goddard or
Hawkins as well.
Who else?
Okay.
No, I was saying you were
I've heard those names.
Okay. Well, essentially, maybe I'm going to pivot here to more of a religious context, because when I was talking to you, I think in Reno, you said like you're not doing necessarily the traditional path. I got interested and I started looking at your book. And Manly P. Hall, the one quote I always pull from him is this: everybody always wants to be saved. Now, when it comes to political stuff, I'm like, just drop it. Nobody's coming to save you. Not even the libertarians. They'll just leave you alone. But then they say, okay, well, on the spiritual side, somebody will save me. And what Manly P. Hall said is Jesus Christ was a figure that a lot of people, I'm not insulting anyone's beliefs, I'm just quoting, that he was a figure that a lot of people say that came to save their sins and help direct their life. He said this is not possible unless the Christ in you does the labor. And from my perspective, you kind of resonated with that a little bit. I was going to ask, do you want to expound upon maybe taking a look? How do spiritual anarchists take a look inward to kind of say, hey, not only can I be liberated from the state, but then I realize that I have an infinite capability, so much as the word I goes, to actually create and change things around me through changing my consciousness, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Can you hear me?
I was catching most of that, and right up until near the end, it was starting to cut out. So I apologize if I missed any part of the last part you said, but I think I got the general of what you were asking.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely one of those people who believes that there are a lot of people who defer their salvation in the sense like they there's a sort of passivity to how they interpret some of their beliefs, a sort of a sense of being out of control. And yet, well, I think it's good to acknowledge the ways and things that are outside your control so you don't stress about them, because it's true. Ultimately, there's a lot that's not in our control. But right, like you said, the spiritual inner path of that divinity in you has to be explored and looked at in the mirror, through that, that change from within in your soul and your internal liberation is the first step in anything else, so that even if you are threatened by worldly powers and governments, that it's inside that you're free first anywhere else. And that liberation from within, I think, comes from a higher power and a sort of reawakening of your true self. And there's many ways people describe that process, and it's ongoing. I think we're constantly going through spiritual deaths and rebirths and learning ways in which we are wrong and putting those parts of us to death and sort of being resurrected or reborn to learn and grow and become something newer and better. And so that internal spiritual liberation.
That, to kind of expound upon that, a big thing that David Icke says is this, and I do agree. Even though I advocate for political action and I advocate for agorist action, I guess the biggest realization is, and they've even kind of said this behind closed doors. David Rockefeller said, "I hope people don't realize that we're all one and that we're all kind of one consciousness and people have the infinite ability to create, or we're done." And David Icke, you can disagree with him or not on specific things. I'm not going to go into all this stuff, but one of his biggest things is once people realize we're interconnected, that we are infinite consciousness, then it's very, very hard. Maybe it's impossible at that point to control them, because they say, as Neville Goddard would put it, I'm the operant power. I have the ability to, for lack of a better word, to expand my consciousness and create my own destiny. And not only do I not need a central institution to do that, like a government, but I don't need, even at that point, any middlemen or anything, because I realized that everything that I needed happened to come from me. Now, I get it. That's a spiritual take that some people disagree with. I'm kind of blending the lines in spirituality and politics. But I see that being there. I see a lot of people coming to certain realizations. He also made a pretty interesting statement that said, people fight people and get in wars because mind fights mind. Like, I'm a Christian, he's a Muslim, I'm a Muslim, you're a Jew, I'm this, I'm that, I'm Albanian, you're this, I'm Ukrainian, you're Russian, Palestinian. You could go down the line. But if people realized the same consciousness or the same expression of consciousness was what they were fighting, then they'd say no. They're like, well, that's me, it's just a different expression of me in a different form. It's just the universe is acting through both of us. He's a different incarnation of the universe.
Essentially, Kareem, what I think you're getting at here is that the politicians' ability to maintain the conquer and divide narrative will ultimately help them maintain their power and their control. But so long as the people are divided and not united, and not feeling as though they're not part of the same consciousness, or that they're separate, they're different entities, and that they don't share the same core common principles and values, then it's easy for the elites such as Klaus Schwab and Hillary Clinton, any of the political or global administrative elites, to maintain power. And this is why the news and the media, I think, is such an important tool for totalitarian states across the entire globe to control not only its people, like in the sense that they're going to manipulate the information that their people and their citizens are going to see, but their ability to make people act in a manner which coincides with the with the government they want to sort of coerce with. So they want to manipulate information to get people to move in the way they want to move, because if they can keep them in that line, it doesn't mean that there's no discrepancies or that the people here and there won't protest, but if for the most part 70-60% of the time they can keep the people sort of down the same line to where they don't address any of the core issues, they don't actually use political means to change the system, especially if they try and use violence and things like that, then of course the state will automatically, control them. Because, if you think you're going to end the state, or let's say overthrow your totalitarian system by violence, you have no idea how not only politics works in these days, but just government in general. But the good thing, the sort of counter to that, is that a lot of people now have cameras in their pockets. So it's harder for the state to just get away with blatant tyrannies. We see this with cops. We see this with people in power everywhere. Is that there's always a camera watching now. So states have to be careful with exactly what they do, especially ones that don't have immense control over the media as far as the information getting out from their state to another state. China, for example, has a pretty tight lock on the internet there and what people get out of China. Most of the stuff that leaves China, as far as videos, the state probably approves it, and there's some stuff that gets leaked, of course, but very little. So if people can break out of the sort of paradigm and shift out of the paradigm that we're political enemies, or that because you're on the left, you fundamentally hate me, or you fundamentally hate the other person that's on the left because you think, let's say, they're pedophiles, groomers, throw any of the terms that a lot of the modern conservatives use, and they may be true. I'm not saying that they're not true, but if we can break away from that and agree to work with all the people on the left and all the people on the right who are sane and rational, and we can disagree on policy issues. We can disagree on economic standpoints. We can disagree on all types of different circumstances and topics. But we can agree that there's this parasitic global administrative organization that seeks to essentially maintain a social order. And so long as that social order, and I use the term social because and I use the term order, although it's really not order. It's quite the opposite. It's the opposite of stability. It's instability. That's like the term democracy, right? When we're bringing democracy to Afghanistan, right? Ghana just got rid of the U.S. dollar. They're going to start trading on gold, right? Now we're going to go bring them some democracy, right? We're going to stabilize other countries, but we know it's quite the opposite. It's just like 1984 or Brave New World, doublespeak. It's the opposite of that. We're going to bring instability. We're going to bring the opposite of democracy, tyranny, chaos, the opposite of social order. So if people can break away from the state social order and understand that the state, for one, doesn't have that much control over you, if you as an autonomous individual work with other autonomous individuals and vote and spend with your dollar, especially don't give your money to a state, and do all sorts of different policy standpoints, then it will end very quickly. Like, that's what I don't think people understand, is that it's hard to get those people out of DC. Yes, I get that. They're stuck in there. The swamp is deep. I get that. But if enough people, and you don't need quite a bit, but if enough people get together and their interests align, similar to the way the globalist interests align, if the people's interests align and they not only vote with their actual vote democratically, electorally, but they vote with their values, they vote with their dollar, they vote with where they buy their houses. If they do all that in a sort of unified fashion, I mean, the sort of administrative state that is been placed in the Western world, it's all over the globe right now. It wouldn't stand a chance, and it would fall fairly quickly. But it's funny how the state uses the term society, right? You hear that a lot, like the betterment of society, or for the for the need of social order. All these different terms they throw around from different departments and different intelligence agencies and bureaus and bureaucracies, when it's quite the opposite, and they know that, and they know that very well. That when those people, for example, Colin Powell and all those people from the early 2000s, Iraq, Afghanistan days, they knew what they were doing. Some people might not have known, but a great deal of them knew that they weren't bringing democracy to a country. Because when you look at it historically, when have we ever brought democracy to a country? Is there even an example of that? The only countries that the left can really use as a positive example are usually South Korea and Japan. That's pretty much it. But we also know that we didn't bring them democracy. They already had those interests aligned before we ever helped them. And we didn't go over there and invade their country. There was World War II, of course, and we were fighting Japan, but they decided to take that route, and we supported them in that route. That's much different than a entirely different culture of values and religions and beliefs, and we go into that country, invade it under false pretense, completely.
And who's to say democracy is good? Like, why should we be spreading it? It's not working here. It's kind of awful. So yeah, I think, and so a question I've been asking myself a lot lately, because I became a libertarian in 2016. I used to be a hawkish neocon on the right, and in my journey to libertarianism, I'd say for the first from 2016 to 2020, I believe strongly in this idea that everyone wants to be free deep down. Everyone wants to be libertarian deep down. They just don't know it yet. We just have to awaken them and show them the information and convert and save the world in that sense. And it's only by 2020 in the last 2 years that I've really had to re-examine that question and go, is it possible that there will never be a libertarian majority anywhere in the world? That we are a permanent minority, we are a permanent underclass of people who think like us, and it's not so much that we just need to reach the right people or have the right message, but that that most people do not want to be free. And when you face that question, I think
the average person doesn't want to be free. He simply wants to be safe. I think that's generally what people believe.
Right. And even when you could show them that actually you're not safe either by obeying them, they still don't care. There are people who would literally rather die, walk right into their own grave, than push back or be, critical think or be free. They would prefer convenience to the point of death. And I think we need to start thinking in terms of, if we are a permanent minority, and there's only so many human beings who have the interest and effort and intelligence and wisdom to want to be free, what do we do with that? Is our goal to convert and change the world, like to our religion, you could say? Or is it to gather those of us who see the way we do, carve out our own piece of the world that can be ours, and just leave? I mean, like we've always said, we just want to be left alone. But is it possible that we need to leave the rest of the world alone? Like, if people want to be slaves, is our goal to liberate everyone, and from the plantation and overthrow the masters? Or is it just to carve a hole in the fence to say, hey, any of you who are tired of this, let's go. There's an underground railroad. Let's get out of here. And if the rest want to stay, fine. Lately, both literally with our libertarianism, but also spiritually too.
We have like stuff like the Free State Project. We have stuff like the Free State Project, which is carving the whole thing to get out. But
exactly right. Like, is that our solution, to just gather and
I want to make
secede?
I say yes and no. I'll give you an answer. Yes and no. I think in the short term, carving out a hole is a good idea, so you can get stuff done. You can get your food. You can get your guns. You can figure out a way to navigate all this madness. I think in the long term, though, if you have a central institution that's a monopoly, there's stuff like Ruby Ridge. And that's kind of what I asked these agorists. I'm like, okay, fine, let's go into the wood. Even like, fine, you want to go into the woods and all that stuff. Like, they seem to find you. They seem to eventually catch up, especially if you get out, carve a hole and don't pay them taxes. That's like the mafia's like, where's my cut? So eventually,
right,
if you have criminals, which to me they're just the mafia except worse, they're gonna say, "Yo, I want my cut from these people," and maybe you can have some people like the Amish who get away, but most of the time they're gonna want a cut because that's how they exist. The state isn't really gonna exist if they don't get a cut, and if you're depriving them of tax dollars by saying, "Hey, I'm carving a hole, I'm out of here," eventually they might want to come for you. So I think long term, we got to be like, I got to get rid of these things. That's why I tell people that even if we get rid of things like NATO BRICS is a problem. Hey, if we get rid of, federal government, okay, let's figure out, how and decrease the state government's power too, because they have things like property tax and they can still take your house. So until it gets to a level where there's no central institution, there's no Leviathan, in my opinion.
Well,
and you still got to keep fighting.
Well, imagine this scenario, right? Let's say, we're trying to escape the slave owner, trying to escape the plantation. Is the slave owner and the masters, are they going to fight harder to keep us from escaping if we're also trying to free all their other slaves? Or if it's just us who want to leave, do you think they're willing to cut their losses as long as they can keep the rest of them? And if most people want to be a part of these slave systems and they want those systems to exist to have their little elite clubhouse, what kind of deal can be made in which we go, fine, just leave us alone and we'll leave you alone. You can have your plantation of people who just apparently want to be slaves still, and just let, it's like, we don't need to overthrow Pharaoh and convert the Egyptians. We're just, Moses going, let my people go. Let us get out of here. And I think about that a lot. Like, is our job to save everyone, or to find and gather those of us who do want to be free, and find a way for us to do that? And much like the flood story too. Like, if the flood's coming and can't be stopped, isn't our job to build arks, to gather people on the boat who want to live, and go, all right, let's build an ark. We're not here to gather, every other person on here. We're just trying to save what part of the world we can. And I think about that a lot. On a spiritual level too, it kind of aligns with this theme that not everyone is going to choose to be converted, and you kind of have to let them go through their own hell first. It's like, are there people we can't save from, either literal or figurative hell, where apparently some people need to go there first before they change their mind, before they realize, never mind, I don't want to do this. Maybe it's only when people have suffered their own choices long enough that they will maybe change their mind. I don't know.
You know what I'll say to that? There's a documentary out now. I'm not going to say what the name of it is, but there are people who chose to trust the state in a certain specific way in that documentary, and they got, the results of that.
Yeah.
And if the estimates are true, what that's kind of telling me is the state wants to minimize the number of people who would actively resist by doing this. I don't buy their, it's global warming in the planet. I think they want to minimize the amount of people push back on it.
It's funny how the solution to climate change, the solution to global warming, is lowering the population. And it's also funny that, of course, the biggest problem with climate change is it's going to destroy the planet. Well, why would we care about the planet being destroyed in the first place, right? Because, there's probably trillions of planets out there. Why do we care so much about our planet? Well, because we live on it, and what happens with our planet affects us as a society, right? We wouldn't really care about climate change if it only killed sheep. Maybe some crazies would, but if it only took out rats, if it only took out, some whatever population of sea creature, we wouldn't care that much about it. But the reason why it's such a political issue, and the reason why it's fear-mongered so much, is because its ramifications are, let's just say, this is the extreme version. The ramifications are sea levels rise extremely, and a lot of people on this planet die due to climate change, right? Let's say it like that. But then the solution to this is to also kill people, is to make the poor more poor. So it's like, what are you at? What is this climate change issue? Do you want people not to suffer because of climate change, or do you want to use certain data and mix data with other data, take hand-picked data, and use this environmental issue as a pretext to control governments around the world to implement climate and environmental policies, which will implement, in the long run, a digital sort of CBDC, a digital identity, and people will have to pay taxes on their carbon that they emit, and people will no longer be allowed to drive gas cars. And the implications of that in itself, like, I love how people just say this. Like, California's just like, we're going to just ban gas cars by, 2030, 2035? So you're going to get rid of an entire industry. You're going to just slash an entire industry, $1 billion industry, and you're not going to allow those cars to get made whatsoever. So you're going to put your thumb on the scale, as it said, and slash innovation. And you're doing that under the pretext of, once again, the good of society, and you're doing it to save the environment, when we know, even if we get to net zero, even if the entire West, the Western world, gets to net zero, that would still leave 95.2% of the pollution from India and China. They're the two biggest polluters. We can do whatever we want with our environmental policies. They're still going to contribute 95% of the pollution. And let me tell you right now, when you look at China, when you look at India a little more than China, but China has no plans on worrying about pollution. They're focused on innovation. They're focused on technological advancement. They have an entire agenda, their 2045 plan, to take over the U.S. as the biggest economy in the globe. They don't care about coal. They don't care about any of this stuff. We actually, this is what gets me about a lot of the
It's all a
environmentalists.
pretext for their control scheme, and I think their murder scheme. I think,
and I can tell you that's 100% true. Sorry,
yeah.
Let me cut you off. And one thing,
I think, yeah.
If you connect the dots, which I kind of did, well, not so much connect the dots, but like,
if you look at where the stars align, that's what I like to say.
If you look at China's pollution, and they have no initiatives to clean that, and me and you get that. I'm not an environmentalist. I'm not an energy professional.
Yeah,
I'm crazy ANCAP with a mic that makes freelance videos and hits buttons on computers. But I'm sure Klaus Schwab knows, because he always talks about a green economy. China's not green. Yet he says China's the model going forward.
The model. Yes, exactly.
Model. It tells me 100% they don't care about green energy. They don't care about global warming. They're using that as a humanitarian front to enact control and to make the population go down. So my answer to you is, because of what the state is actively doing, they want to control everybody or get them out of the way. So
now you're getting China's not the model because they're the most humane. They're not the model because they're the most environmentally friendly. They're the model because they have the tightest locked control over their citizens. And the control is not just physical, it's not just barricades, it's digital, it's virtual, it's chemical. They have an immense control system around their citizens right now that all of these global administrative people, Klaus Schwab, included, they're in public bragging about. And who also did that? Justin Trudeau said he wishes he could have a system, a government like Xi Jinping's. He's jealous that he has a full totalitarian state. So these Western leaders really want that same control that Xi Jinping and Kim Jong Un has over their leaders. They want full control, and it's sort of sadistic when you look at it, because it's like, why do you want that much control? Because when we look at, nations historically, the people who take that very massive control, they take that absolute power, they always end up dying. And usually it's not in a good way either. Usually it's by a hanging or a shooting or killing themselves. It's like these leaders don't read history. It's like they haven't read a history book to even look that the villain in every single totalitarian state dies, and doesn't die in, let's say, a virtuous manner. It's quite the opposite.
Well, and you're all making great points, and I think my question now as a libertarian and a sort of in these rebellious spaces is like, what is our solution to this beyond just politics of voting? Because that's part of it, but there's clearly bigger things going on and bigger machinery moving. And I often wonder, is our goal to convert the populace or awaken them, or is it to gather, build arcs, and outlast our enemies? Because if these systems do succeed, they'll also collapse and fail, I think. As we know, governments are inherently self-destructive, and people following governments eventually destroy themselves. They starve or they die, because I think the irony is that our enemies are their own worst enemy, and yet we're the collateral damage of their own policies, right? Those of us who want to be free. And I often wonder, how do we protect ourselves and insulate ourselves from what they're planning to do to themselves and all of us? Because maybe the elites think they're going to get away with it and live comfy lives and all that, but as we see, maybe they don't realize how much their own schemes will backfire against themselves too in the end. And so, yeah, it's like, how do we escape? Is it gather in one place like New Hampshire and look after each other and build up these parallel societies, or are there other escapes, other ways to get away from the fallout of whatever's going to come next? Yeah. And is it only spiritual? I don't know.
I think there's a spiritual aspect to this. There definitely is. I mean, Don't take it from me. Again, if you can, the documentary that just came out, I think I shared it on my thing.
Yeah.
All the people who examine people who were around this, the final conclusion of all the people in the embalmer industry was there is a pure evil out there, and if we don't band together, that's the last thing I say. He says, I hope there's enough good in the world that enough people like us can band together, because if we don't, these monsters will destroy humanity. And I think he's fundamentally right that there is there is definitely a spiritual war. Now, I don't get super like conservatives do. They want to reference everything to biblical stuff. I don't do that because, there's a lot of different beliefs and stuff out there, and not necessarily correlation is always causation, although there's some interesting things they do say. Mm-hmm. But I will say, yes, there's a fundamental, whatever it is you believe, I think you can see some evil that's anti-human. It goes beyond politics to say, I think there's an anti-human agenda out there that wants enslavement and death. And I think there's also, a side that's saying, hold on, let's stop. I think there's one side saying, hold on, let's stop, but let's keep the institutions using. And then I'm not a fan of either. I'm a fan of the side that's saying, not only are the people bad, the institutions are all bad, and they gotta go. And I don't know what replaces them. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but we have a couple examples from the past, like Gaelic Ireland, medieval Iceland, Chiron, Somalia, that, hey, we can do this without the state, and let's try that. I like to bring as many people as possible, and then the people who don't come along, well, I guess that's how it is, and hopefully they outlasted it.
Yeah, and talking about that, the original question reminded me of. So I've been reading a lot of like Russian literature and just books about Russia, especially Tsarist and obviously Soviet, pre-Soviet, post 1917 revolution. And one of the things that you see in one of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's book, The Gulag Archipelago, when he talks about it, is that millions, upwards of, they estimate 66 million people in Stalin's Russia, 66 million Russian people, Soviet people, were imprisoned in these gulags, right? It was so bad to the point where after World War II, anyone who had slept in a Western hotel was brought back. The Soviets were finding all the addresses of all these Soviet soldiers who slept in any Western hotel and didn't die fighting, and they brought them back and they locked them all up. If you even had sex with a German girl or anything of that nature, they would bring you back and throw you in the gulag. They even throw you in the gulag even if you fought for their own military and died for the Soviet Union. They would take your family away. They were vicious and cold-hearted, and they did not care about anything other than anything other than maintaining power, than the Communist Party maintaining power, Stalin maintaining power, and for the communist directive to stay consistent and not have any sort of political threats. And so, Alexander gets locked up in the Gulag. Long story short, he gets out. He starts writing the book in the Gulag. And he talks to all these other prisoners who he's locked up with, gets all their stories, and sort of aggregates, a general consensus among the prisoners. And one of the things that he talks about is that even the communist loyalists, right, who got locked up in the Gulag and got sentenced 25 years on Order 58, which was essentially a penal code in the Soviet Union, which mandated you get 10 to 25 for anti-Soviet, anti-revolutionary rhetoric, which can be pretty much defined as anything. But these people, till their dying day, even when they were getting beat by the Gulag guards, refused to admit that the reason why they were being beat is because the very thing they supported, the system they supported and believed in, the communist system, the Communist Party, the Soviet Union Communist Party in particular, had done this to them. They, until their dying day, would say it wasn't their fault. Stalin must have made a mistake. Someone made a mistake. And even till their deathbed, they thought that they were innocent, and the party could not have done that. And it took millions of people after that to finally speak out, right? He essentially was a big reason of why the Soviet Union was brought down, his book, right, which won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1971. And it took all that before the people of the Soviet Union were like, we don't want any more of this. This is enough. And even after his book, it took another 20 years for it to completely collapse into itself. Obviously, it collapsed, but even the people who were locked up in the very gulag that Stalin had, and Stalin had ordered these people in gulags, it was hard for them to even admit that that system that they supported turned on them, because that would mean that the system that they supported slash believed in is not a good system. And I think that's what we're looking at with a lot of people on the left and the right. They don't want to admit, especially people on the right, this in particular, they don't want to admit the institutions are gone, like nada, zilch,
Yeah.
that they're no longer, they are no longer institutions of, I should say at first, morality. They're no longer institutions of ethical principles. They are simply tools and arms of the state to propel and propagate propaganda and manipulate the masses. They're gone. There is no saving a lot of these I'm not saying every single institution, because there's quite a bit, but almost every institution has been gone for a long time, and the right is very unwilling to admit that. They are still under the impression, and if you look at a lot of right-wing people, there's good guys in the FBI. There's good guys in the CIA. That's what they always say. There's good guys in this agency. There's good guys in this department. We just have to get rid of those good guys and install our good guys. Get rid of those bad guys and install our good guys and make it all good guys. When you look at the system itself, the FBI was originally started in the idea of it originally came about in World War I to arrest people for saying anti-war rhetoric, right? The Espionage Act that was used on American citizens who criticized presidents at that time, criticized Woodrow Wilson for getting into the war, right? The FBI, the CIA. It's not like these things were good institutions one day and then they've just suddenly became corrupted. No, their entire purpose was to have more and more central control over the citizens, have more and more agencies, have more and more bureaucrats. And guess what? When you have agencies and bureaucrats, you have more and more places you can send money. When you have more and more places that quote need money, you take more and more money from your people. So it's like at every level of the calculation by the American government, it's used as a way to maintain power over its people, and create a sort of barricade around itself to cement itself. It's like people need to understand that the state is its fundamental instinctual tendency is to maintain itself, is to cement itself, is to not let itself get destroyed. Right? That's the fundamental tendency of the state, is to expand. And when conservatives realize that the institutions, they're gone, there's no saving them. And maybe you guys disagree with me on that. What do you think? Do you think there's some institutions that are left? Hello?
I think this has to do with the individuals being put in power, not the power systems themselves. And I ask myself a lot lately, how long are we willing to wait for everyone else to catch up to us and what we understand and what we see? And how much longer can we afford? Like, at what point is it too little too late for other people to figure this out? And I'm definitely, I don't want to say it's a black pill, because it comes with hope, but I do wonder, like, is our role to show people the truth, or to get people who see the truth to it's almost like I wonder how much of our energy and resources should be on protecting, insulating ourselves from all this. Because I agree with you, all these things we're saying, it's like we are fired up, we can explain it to people day and night, and as we've seen, most people don't get it or don't want to get it. It's like they're not buying what we're selling, even though it's true, even though we know it's a good product, even though we know we're right. We know we're right, and we've seen how we're right. And yet, even after everything that's happened, most people do not care to understand who their enemy is and what's happening to them. And there's like a deep tragedy in that, and it makes me furious on their behalf. And yet I think about those of us who have nobly been trying to save people and help them see what they're doing to themselves. And yet part of me is like, man, yeah, how do we escape from this? I want to know how we get out of this system. Is it gather in New Hampshire or somewhere and secede? Or, because I've also gotten into the conspiracy stuff, which I'm sure you've seen, that's why really? I think I was drawn to yeah, I mean in general, of course, but specifically to flat Earth and this idea that if there are other lands and realms beyond Antarctica or other places that they want hidden from us for that very reason, why wouldn't we try and escape to those places if we could at some point?
Yeah, and if there's
You know,
something else,
and that's a topic. Yeah, and for others, their version of that is going to space, right? They want us to believe that we can just go to another planet and escape all this. But if I'm right, and in my conspiracy world is right, that space is fake and there's no planets to go to. There's only southward and outward past Antarctica. If that's the big secret they're hiding from us, then I want to know. I want us to know that and figure out how we could possibly get there and escape out the fence hole, you know? But that's a whole topic for another day. But I'm only dropping that now into the conversation because it might help explain why that's part of my quest too lately, is to find out how do we get out of this. And yet part of me knows that maybe it's a spiritual thing. We're not going to escape from this until after death anyway.
Not everybody's going to realize it, but like you brought up conspiracy theorists, a lot of people saying you're a conspiracy theorist, you're this, you're that. There's members of the FDA and people are saying you're a conspiracy theorist about a certain thing. And now a lot of people who are mocking people for a particular conspiracy theory, unfortunately, I'm not saying it's a good thing, unfortunately are not here because they didn't want to listen to us about a particular thing and they got the consequence of that. And to me, sometimes that's unfortunately what happens. As Luke Radowski so put it, you're going to keep trusting the government till your pronouns are was, were.
Yeah, that's Yeah, it's really it's like the meme says, the longest, saddest I told you so ever. And I'm already thinking of like, what do we do with this information now that we know that most of humanity doesn't want to be free? Most of them will literally rather die than think for themselves.
I don't know about most. The thing that I think is, I think it's not. I think what you're asking is a good question, right? Which is, should we even waste resources on people that are probably not going to even be saved, or not even be willing to, take the gift and use it and educate themselves? Should we even waste resources on those people? Well, I think it comes down to this. I don't think personally it's a numbers game, meaning I don't think you need to get every American citizen or even, the vast majority of American citizens to wake up to this. I think you need it's a quality game, a qualitative game. It's like Elon Musk, for example. It's like all these people, like Scholzenitz, a perfect example. Sometimes all it takes is 1, 2, 3, 4 people who care deeply about the issue, who get woken up and who do something about it and take action. Like, look at how much Elon Musk has been able to do. You might not like him, but just one person. Look at all those things he's able to do. If you are able to, preach, you don't necessarily have to go to every single person's door, but get this general idea and message out, and you ring it in the ears of the right people. People will listen, and people will start to, change society fundamentally from like a corporate level, and things will get better.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and you're right. We don't necessarily need a majority to have victory, because even a stubborn, sizable minority could affect immense change just from that alone. So that's true. Our margin of victory isn't so high as necessarily having a majority of people on our side, but it is interesting. Like, what does victory actually look like? Is it electoral, or is it I mean, what's our ultimate goal? Is it save the world, or save enough of the world that those of us who want to escape these systems can, and then those who choose to stay in those systems can too? It's like, okay, sure, that's what does it for you. If we free one state in the U.S. and the other 49 still want to be slaves, then at least there's a place to go for people like us, right? We can maybe, secede peacefully and at least be difficult enough to occupy that no foreign power would bother with us, because they'd be like, well, we've got 49 other slave states, whatever. I
mean, maybe, but here's the problem. Then you're surrounded by people who don't like you. I'm all for peaceful secession. I want multiple states to do it, and I want to eventually get every state to do it. Now, I'm saying I want PA or Texas to do it to start a rolling, that, to start kind of get the ball rolling. But the problem is, even if you get there, they could be like, oh, that state's not paying taxes. That state's not giving me a cut. And there's 49 of us here, so let's do something about it. I'm not saying that'll definitely happen. They might let you alone. But if everybody opts out of the state, like if everybody's like, I'm not paying taxes, I'm not paying Social Security, I'm not getting involved in your wars, I'm not getting involved in any stuff like that, then they can't exist anymore. They'd be gone within a few days or a few months. So they don't want that. I think the only thing we can really do is wake people up slowly and then keep bringing people over, but realize the ultimate goal, whether we get to it or not, is to free everybody
and speak the truth.
And just to counter that real quick, like, remember, people saw that we had like a successful libertopia, that they would copy us. Like, would they though? Because in their minds, they'd be like, yeah, but how are we going to pay for our roads without tax? Like I feel like there's a lot of people who would just stay in their system and feel safe and cozy with it. They would see our free little place. Like, think of like how people, I mean, it's like what's free to us is scary to others. So if they saw a place where a bunch of armed libertarians could open carry guns, there's a bunch of like, people who would never want to emulate that or live there. They'd be like, oh, that's scary. I would never want to be somewhere like that. Keep me over here in California where I'm safe from all the guns. And then there's probably conservatives who would look at Libertopia, New Hampshire, whatever, and go, oh my God, look at all those, hippie libertarians. Look at all the drugs they do. God, I would never want to be in a place like that. Let's never copy them. So I think there are a lot of people who really, they wouldn't want to be like us. They would want to stay away from us once we're as libertarian as we can get. And it's really only the government that would decide if they want to try and enslave us. But, maybe we'd be so intimidating with how many of us would be able to actively resist that they maybe they wouldn't bother either. Maybe they would just go, you know what, cut our losses. That's fine. We'll lose that colony, but we got the other 49. So I don't know. I often wonder about that.
Yeah, no, but it's definitely something to think about. I don't have an exact answer though. Maybe it does come down to, okay, we got this one piece of land, and if you're playing Risk, we didn't win Risk, but at least we're not getting attacked. So
yeah,
we will have to see about that.
Well, I'm going to keep trying at every level to affect change. Even despite my sort of black pill moment of giving up on most of humanity, there's a part of me that still has hope that things could still turn around if there is kind of a miraculous resurgence. And yeah, I mean, look, whether the big scale picture is hopeless or not, I think even at these smaller local levels, there's a lot of good change we can do. And I think gathering and being in proximity to other free-minded people is a benefit, because whether it's electorally or just being amongst neighbors who think like you and wouldn't rat you out to the cops kind of thing, like, there's a benefit in being around people like you. Like, any community throughout history has survived persecution and whatnot by gathering in communities, protecting their own, trading with each other, circumventing, the rest of society's rules and laws. I think there's actually precedent that we could have a sort of kingdom amongst kingdoms, or a community within the community that could be insulated from a lot of damage or persecution if we do it right. I don't think it's entirely outside the realm of possibility. But yeah, I don't know what that looks like, if it's one state or multiple ones, or how that all plays out. But
you don't know how. Yeah, I don't know the logistics, and I'm not going to begin to tell you what I think the logistics would look like, or if it looks like that, or if it's cities or states, or if it's individual pieces of a state leaving, or if it's something else like that. What I will say is this: I do think rural areas, are more, independent, and those people want to be left alone. And cities probably will always have that,
sure,
because you're close to people, so they're going to have more of a collectivist mindset. I don't think that's like a weird anomaly, because it happens everywhere. Cities tend to be more collectivist, Democrat, and rural areas tend to be more conservative or libertarian, kind of depending on the demographics. What I will say is, with all this stuff going on, it's probably going to come down to people who want to be left alone, like Zuby says, and people who want to get involved. But let's hope, as they say in the new dog, let's hope we can all get together and there's enough good in the world people can band together. Because if not, then the state's gonna, the way things are going, they're gonna run roughshod on anything. And I don't look at, midterms or just, giving the other half of the ruling class, the baton and saying, oh wow, we solved the problem. We elected the other half of the ruling class. Oh, they're not. Like, they seem to be controlled opposition, most of them, and even if they're not, even if there's a couple good people in their ranks, I don't see that as a viable solution. All these people like saying the midterms, just go vote red and fix everything. I'm like, you kidding me? Right. All you did for me, all you really effectively did, if I'm being honest, is put a bunch of Bush Republicans back in there.
Yeah, right. Oh, I hear you. Well, I have to go in just a minute, but I will at least end on a optimistic note, which is that yes, whatever percentage of the rest of humanity we can get to subscribe to our ideas, I do think there's hope for the stubborn minority of us who want to pool our efforts into helping each other and getting through this all together. So I actually do have a lot of optimism despite my concern for the rest of the country. And I will say, the things I write about in my books deal with hope in the face of all this stuff, with redemption and people who do change and do grow over time. And so I don't think it's I'm not without hope for that. And for those curious, I will plug real quick. You can find my books at jackcaseybooks.com or search for them on Amazon if you type in The Royal Green or WVW. Because I figure, we have all these thoughts, and if I can at least tell stories that express these ideas and these struggles, either A, to spread our ideas to the average person who reads and enjoys sci-fi fantasy stuff, or B, to just entertain us through this all as we get through it, I'm going to keep doing it and trying to, creatively inject our ideas into the culture, or at least help reinforce the troops of our own who already get what's going on, So that's my parting plug. Oh, look at that. You've got it on screen. Thank you, sir. Yes. I have 2 main series, and I would like to make many more. But yeah, I mean, look, I got drawn into politics and conspiracies because as I would write things, I saw them start coming true in reality. I realized, oh, okay, truth is stranger than fiction. And so here I am, caught up in it all with all of y'all. And all I wanted to do was be left alone and write and tell stories. So, but I'm happy, man. I'm happy that you and your other hosts there, and I will say, like I said, despite all this frustration with the rest of the people who are voting for authoritarianism, the thing I've taken from all this is, man, there's a lot of cool people, cool libertarians and anarchist-minded people who get it. And there's so many of us out there, and we're all scattered, and we're finding each other. And that's been the beautiful silver lining of all this is these hard times have made us search for our people and our tribe, to be collectivists, sort of promote there. And we're finding it. We're finding people like us who get what's going on and want to talk about solutions and how to fight the system and how to fix it. And whether we do ultimately or not at the macro level, maybe even just at the personal level, we're, it's the friends we made along the way. So I'm really thankful that
I love that libertarian
that we did this.
As libertarian left, it's like maybe the gold doesn't matter. Maybe it's the friends I made along the way. It just shows libertarian. I want my damn gold. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, but also profit.
Yeah. And
which is why I plug my books, because yes.
I'd say it's both. I do want to convert. I don't want to sit here and be like, okay, I convinced nobody of anything, and I didn't
right. You still want some growth or success there. Yeah.
I want some growth,
even if it's less than you wanted. Yeah. There's at least a gain somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah,
Listen, I want to be rich in friends and rich in money, and those two do not have to be at odds. That's my goal.
Hopefully, crypto though holds its value.
I am a capitalist at heart.
And nothing wrong with that. Give unto Caesar what Caesar, and Caesar doesn't really owe us, you know. I don't know.
Exactly. Caesar don't own shit.
I believe in that.
Yep.
There,
and
but thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking. I really did enjoy it. Got some
thank you, man.
Perspectives that I wouldn't normally, you know, talk about. So that was some interesting stuff we went over. And definitely come back.
Yeah.
When you can.
I would love to. I'd love to. And I'm only sorry my internet connection has been kind of poor. I know I was dropping in and out there, and I missed some of the things you guys said at certain points, but I think I was catching most of it. So I'll try and work on my internet situation here. And hopefully I can power through and do a lot more of this soon. It'd be fun. Follow up some more. Yeah, and yes, buy my books to support me getting better internet. Awesome, man.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank
you. It's good talking to you. I'm glad I got to meet you in Reno, even if briefly. And, you know, maybe if I end up in New Hampshire and more libertarians do, and if you come to Pork Fest or one of those things, we'll cross paths again in person. That'd be cool.
To come to Pork Fest and
man,
some more of these different events. Like I went to Yale, and that was fun. So yeah, I'd like to see kind of what they are.
Oh yeah,
see what libertarians are doing, and then eventually come up with like ideas like what can I do here in Pennsylvania to emulate that, because I don't want to, you know, just say like, oh, wow, this state's doing something cool, this state's doing something cool, and then never do it here. But with that being said, it's a pleasure talking to you, and I will catch you soon. I will try and have this up by either today or tomorrow.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and if you want sci-fi, you can check out that new doco. Not going to say the name of it because I have a feeling. Oh, I think I know
the one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like
I said, I wrote about things and then saw them happen, and I went, "Holy crap!" The fantasy has become reality.
Some of
there's a lot of
easy way.
Inspiring motherfuckers. Yeah.
But
all right, man. Thank you.
So
we'll talk again soon.
With the Essential Libertarians with Jack Casey and my awesome co-host Daniel Betro. We will catch you next time.